Welcome to Family Addiction Recovery Podcast, sponsored by the Renaissance Ranch. We are so excited about this opportunity to blend the voices of the addicted loved one and their family member in the same episode so that you can start to understand and learn what to do when you don't know what to do. And we're super excited for our guests today. They both have personal experience with addiction. And then my husband and I will represent the family member perspective. And we've, for the past 15 years, have had the privilege of facilitating 12-step meetings and also teaching family education classes that you can find at renaissanceranch.com that are open to the public. Today, we are excited to jump into step one. Last week, not last week, but our last couple of episodes were sharing our family story. We have 5 children, and our oldest 2 sons, Preston and Tyson, were on with us in the first episode and sharing our experiences as a family. And so we're going to jump into step one. We're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to focus on solutions rather than the problem. And then we're going to talk about how to get your loved one into treatment, or at least be open to attending some recovery classes with you, like AA or NA. Some of your churches, I know our church has an addiction recovery program. And that way, that's what we did. When our sons were struggling, we did not know what to do. So we started attending addiction recovery 12-step meetings at our church. And from there, started to learn from the people in the room what worked for them and what didn't work for them. So, Rick, do you want to introduce our guest tonight?
Yes, thanks, honey. I'm grateful to be here with you. And I know those of you that are, that are listening, are probably hurting and are wondering, what can I do? What should be done with my loving addict? I just don't know what to do, and you're hurting, and I want to validate that. And that's what we're here to talk about, is how to help you help your loving addict. And we have here 2 incredible individuals who I just love. On the right, we have Lane Porter. And Lane is a clinical mental health counselor. He works at the ranch as the intake specialist. He works all day with family members and loving addicts that need to get into treatment. He's going to share a little bit of his background because he is a recovering addict. And he's also now a clinician. And that really is a powerful combination to help in helping you today. Next to him on the left, we've got Dave Belt, wonderful man, recovering addict. Both of these gents have 5 years of recovery, and they've got some dark abysses that they had to face first. And we want them to each share a little bit of their story first, so you know when they share that what they have to say will have some credibility and some impact. So, Lane, why don't we start with you? Why don't you take maybe 5 minutes or so, share your story, your struggles, be vulnerable if you could, and we'll then turn over to Dave.
Sure. Thanks. So, like they said, my name is Lane Porter, and in about 1999, I had a crisis of faith that had preceded this by about 4 years, but had stopped attending my religious services, had fallen out of contact with God and with my spirituality, and was really struggling to find my place in the world. Was experimenting with drugs, and
how old were you then at that point?
About 23.
Okay.
So kind of a later onset, more of an onset as an adult. But in 1999, at the age of 23, I found cocaine. And for lack of a better term, it was an instant love affair. Mm-hmm. It really grabbed me and just held me tight. And I thought I had found what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Like, those were there was an emotional relationship with that. What I didn't recognize at that time was that I began to sacrifice everything else in my life that was important for me to continue using. And through that, I lost relationships. I lost jobs. I lost my home. I became homeless. And at some point, I was living every day on the streets, committing crimes, and hustling just to get more drugs. Ended up serving some time, getting incarcerated, and while incarcerated, I think As frequently happens, although it's cliche, it is a very real experience. I had a mighty change of heart. I recognized, because in that silence of incarceration, you can't help but experience the Spirit. And I began to develop again a relationship with my higher power, and decided, 1, that I wanted to change my life, 2, that I wanted a relationship with my higher power again, and 3, that I wanted to maybe stay involved with recovery in a long-term way. So over the course of a few years, I went back to school. I started getting my bachelor's in psychology. I reestablished my relationship with the church and with my higher power. Started mending relationships with my family, and was really able to kind of turn it around. Ended up getting a bachelor's degree in psychology with an emphasis on addiction. I graduated summa cum laude and valedictorian of the psychology department from Utah State University, which was neat as a felon.
from homeless to valedictorian. That's
right. Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy.
But there's a lot of hope, and when people, their loved one gets into jail or is in a prison, they think, oh man, all is lost. It isn't. It isn't.
Our son says that going to jail saved his life.
Yep.
And that's where he found Christ. That's where he found Christ and found God.
And I think it's amazing, because I think that when we have stumbling blocks, what we don't recognize is that the counter of that is that we're offered opportunities and ability that surpasses maybe what others could do.
So now you're working at the ranch. You've been there quite some time. Your darkest abyss has been your greatest light now to help others. It takes an addict to heal an addict. When you get a call by a mom or a dad or an addict, what they're feeling, what they've been through, how to help them, how to counsel with a family member that has a loved one in addiction. And so it's a powerful thing. It's just wonderful to hear from the darkness and then the light, and to see your life now and to see what's happened. So we'll hear more. But thank you, Lane. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Well, if I could too, Rick, I kind of want to hear the rest of Lane's story, just because I know there's a little bit more. Because I know that you were doing really, really well. You got your schooling, and then maybe finish your story just a little bit.
So,
sorry, because I just know a second part.
Very edited version. So I ended up getting the bachelor's degree and then a master's degree. Became a clinical mental health counselor. Got nationally board certified as a master's addiction counselor. Was a clinical director at a huge organization in our state. And then I got complacent. I stopped doing my work. I started letting anger with interpersonal issues, pride with my success, and those things interfere. And I started thinking that I didn't need to work in my recovery anymore, that I had this figured out, that I didn't need to do my dailies, that I didn't need to work an active recovery program. Long story short, it was only a matter of time before I relapsed. And so I have gotten a degree in the field, risen up in the field, relapsed while working in the field, and now I'm back in it. And most importantly, what I recognized is that this disease is cunning, baffling, and powerful. You cannot lose your relationship with your higher power. You cannot stop working your recovery and think that you are recovered. There is no recovered. It is a journey, and it is a lifelong, ongoing journey.
Wow, that's powerful. It's so easy to get complacent just in life, and we've heard that so much over the last 15 years from so many people, that addiction, at first too, I was so devastated. I thought, you mean my sons have to do addiction for the rest of their life? They have to go to meetings the rest of their life? But Rick and I were actually attending meetings as well, and we have been, because our church actually in our kind of gave us a calling to facilitate meetings in the jail and the prison. And so we did that for over 10 years. And it's crazy how how you start to love recovery and you look forward to those meetings and you start actually getting addicted to the meetings, and you just have never met more wonderful, authentic, loving people where there's more hope in a room than a 12-step meeting. So, Dave, it would be so fun. Lane, we're going to come back and I want to ask some questions with you too, clinically. But as far as step 1 goes, when we come to recognize that we're powerless, at least from a family member perspective, we are powerless over the addiction of our loved one, and our lives are becoming unmanageable. And then, Dave, I'm going to have you kind of state step 1 from maybe the addict perspective for those of you who are struggling with addiction out there, and then kind of share your story as it relates to step 1.
Great. I'm grateful to be here. I'm Dave. I'm a recovering addict. Step 1 says we admitted that we were powerless over our addictions and that our lives had become unmanageable. This is a very abridged version of my story. I want to talk about 2 days. And I'm going to tell my story backwards. I'm going to go back to the last time that I took a drink and my sobriety date, which is June 29th of 2015.
About 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
Good job.
So I was about 11 o'clock in the day, and I was at a job I didn't really like, and was just all balled up in my nerves, and I wanted some relief, and I knew exactly how to get that relief. And as soon as that idea was in my head, it just took over, and that's all I could think about. And next thing I walk out of my job. I didn't even say where I was going. I got in my car and I started to drive. And it was just get me that sense of ease and comfort that I had come to know so well. So I left my job. I drove to 7-Eleven as quickly as I could, bought some tall cans, and proceeded to get in my car again and drive to the nearest alley. I put my car in park and I popped the top and just started to guzzle. Now, remember that word powerless. This illustrates for me how powerless I am over these addictions, because here I am at that time, 37 years old, a guy who had 3 DUIs and knew that if I was ever to get a 4th, there's probably looking at serious jail time or prison time. Consequences weren't keeping me from that alcohol. I'm powerless over it, right? And so I started to guzzle these drinks, and I wanted to go somewhere to drink them, and so I drove to the park nearest to my dad's house where I was staying, and I walked over to a park bench and I sat down at this park, and I just started to guzzle this beer, and here I was the guy in the park with a brown bag and beer in it. That was not where I envisioned I would be at 37, right? That was not the vision I had for myself and for my future. Jump back 16 years earlier to when I'm 21 years old. I came home from a mission, an honorable mission, serving in France, and I came home on Thanksgiving, and I started to have this idea that I needed to rebel, that I wanted to rebel, that I believed, and Lane said it's cunning, baffling, powerful. To me, that's how the adversary works on me, in that same way, with these cunning illusions. And I told myself I needed to rebel to be more well-rounded. And I convinced myself this was a good idea to try alcohol for the first time. And so about 2 months later at a Super Bowl party is when I first tried alcohol. And I always remember, to me, that tasted like soggy Cheerios. I hated the taste, but I loved the effect. And it was like, as soon as I found that, I said, where has this been my whole life? Now I've got my miracle drug to get me through anxiety, to get me through family situations, to get me through nervousness at parties and being shy. And, so those are the 2 days. And obviously I can't talk about all the in-between. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit. But let me sum it up this way. To give you an idea of the state of mind I was in 5 years ago. I was constantly at war with myself. And I was in these inner turmoils all of the time because I was waking up in places that I didn't know how I got there. When I was drunk, I was full of recklessness. And when I was sober, I was full of remorse. And that is not a way to live. And it was just this constant ball of nerves, always just could not stay sober. I'd been to treatment 2 different times, including 90 days inpatient and another outpatient program. And here I was, 37 years old, on a park bench with the brown bag, and I'm drinking in the middle of the day when I should be at work.
Wow. I cannot imagine the shame of that. I can't imagine. So how did you get to where you are now? Like, that was 5 years ago,
Yeah.
and now I know that you're giving back. You're working. I think you work at the ranch, right?
I do. Yeah, I get to work there one day a week on the weekends.
Right. So tell us kind of how you got. What was recovery like for you, and how did you get to where you are today?
I remember this really important decision. So I was picking myself up. I was going to meetings. I was trying to work with sponsors. I thought I was doing what I needed to do, but I guess, I wish I could just figure it out too. I guess I wasn't ready. I wasn't willing. They say you need to be honest and open-minded and willingness are 3 really crucial things of ingredients for recovery. And maybe it just didn't all come together for me. But I'd been going to ARP meetings, and I remember I was at a noon ARP meeting, and it was after that meeting, what we call the meeting after the meeting, where I was talking to another addict. And she suggested to me, have you thought about getting back into treatment? And I thought, man, maybe that is a good idea for me right now. And gave me a phone number. Long story short, I called up Tyson, and I was actually in treatment that afternoon or that evening.
At the Renaissance Ranch.
At the Renaissance Ranch,
Wow.
In the outpatient program, and so I thought that I would try that, and if needed, go inpatient. But there I was sitting in group that night, and the rest is history, right? There's been I'll tell you one thing. It's taken many good decisions, and it has been many small things that have gotten me to where I'm at today. And at times, not listening to my head and not listening to my thoughts and going with the instant gratification and desire. But even off all that, the only thing I can say to you, somehow God's kept me sober for 5 years. It's really what it comes down to is perhaps I wasn't ready yet. I wasn't willing enough yet. And when it clicks, it clicks. And I often would hear, please don't leave until the miracle happens. And,
I love that.
Luckily I didn't die in between relapses and meetings. And I kept coming back. Even though I was just defeated over and over again, I kept coming to meetings. I kept coming back. So
Dave, let me ask you,
Yeah.
I look at your life now. Since you've been in recovery 5 years, you've got a wonderful wife.
Married.
You've got a little boy.
Yes.
Children.
And a little girl on the way. You've got a great job. You work giving back at the ranch because of your love for the ranch. I've heard it said that this addiction is a brain disease. It's a disease like diabetes. If you have diabetes, you got to manage that with insulin. This is a disease that you have to manage it. You've learned that. Maybe in just 1 minute or so, what have you learned on a daily basis to what you're doing now to help manage the disease?
Oh, yeah, the dailies.
Great.
Maybe
your
explain the dailies.
versus what you weren't doing before.
Okay, that's great.
Okay.
I want to refer to a sign that I see in every ARP meeting that says principles with the promise, and on the wall there it says prayer, meetings, and scriptures. Those are Sunday school answers that I didn't want to believe were part of the solution, but what I've come to find today is that is part of the solution. And my dailies are every morning I start with a prayer to Heavenly Father, please keep me sober today. I find that if I can do that in private, it's best for me. And so me in particular, I say my prayer in the shower in the morning. And I say, please help me stay sober. And then I do some reading out of the any kind of recovery reading. So I like the 24 Hours a Day book. It's called the Little Black Book. Starts with a little prayer of the day, a meditation of the day, and a thought of the day. Then I do a chapter in the Book of Mormon. And then following that, I make a list. I have an app on my phone. It's a gratitude app, and I type in 3 things I'm grateful for. that is my routine in the morning, and I've gotten to the point now where I don't feel my day can start until I've done those things. Or if I don't do it, it gets at me. But it took a while to get into that habit. Then I go throughout my day, and when I'm agitated or when I make a mistake, I try to admit that and try to apologize as soon as possible. But I'm jumping ahead through steps here, and I want to keep it on step 1. But then at the end of the day is to thank God for keeping me sober another day. So it's just this acceptance and this realization that it's not me that's doing this, it's God that's doing it. And for the longest time, I would hear people say that, and I couldn't figure out how did they tap into that power. It sounds great in theory, but how do I make it so that I'm letting God lead my life? What does that look like? And all I can tell you is that I had to experience that in my own way and for myself, and I had to come unto God willing and honest and open-minded and just be defeated. It took me just literally being completely done, surrender with the white flag, and it's just helped me from there.
Wow. So what I hear you saying is that where you were so powerless with step 1, you recognize you're so powerless, and then you come to recognize your life's unmanageable. But you have found the power, it sounds like, through working your 12 steps, through finding your higher power, and every single day not being complacent, like what Lane talked about, and doing those actions every single day. It's interesting because from a family member perspective, before I recognized step 1, when I thought that it was in my power to heal my sons, it was so painful because everything I tried didn't work. And it was so liberating for me to start going to 12-step meetings and realize, oh, so you mean this is not my job, that I'm supposed to be powerless. So let me qualify that. I'm powerless over the life-threatening brain disease of addiction. I'm powerless over addiction, but I have power to be able to find peace and happiness regardless of the choices of everyone around me. And so that's why we love the 12 steps so much. And we learned the 12 steps help us to take that unmanageability and have it teach us how to have a managed life, physically, emotionally, mentally. But Lane, I want to come back to you real quick now, in that you are an intake director. A lot of these people, a lot of you that are finding our podcast probably have loved ones who are struggling with addiction. They may live at home. They may not live at home. They may be teenagers, under 18, or they may be legal adults. So Lane, I know every day you have tons of people calling you that you are counseling with. Can you maybe share with our listening audience, what do I do if I have a loved one and I want to help them get involved in recovery, or at least maybe going to recovery meetings, and then maybe even be open to treatment if they need, if that's the level of care that they need?
Sure. Before I do that, because we're on step 1, maybe we could read Rick, if you could read the step 1
Let me
for
read
the family.
For the addiction manual, and then for the family manual. Here's the step 1 for those struggling with addiction. Admit that you of yourself are powerless to overcome your addictions and that your life has become unmanageable. This is as a family perspective. This is how we're feeling. This is where Chrissy and I were. Come to understand and accept we are powerless over the addiction of a loved one, and recognize that our lives have become unmanageable. Because maybe they're out of control. Their life has become unmanageable. But as a family member, our lives become unmanageable, right?
Equally.
I mean, how many times were we at 3 o'clock in the morning couldn't sleep because we're trying to figure this out? During the day, all we can do during the day is worry and have fear or resentment. Our life becomes unmanageable.
Yep.
And so that's step 1, realizing that and understand that our lives are, we're powerless over the addiction of another. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Lane, won't you go ahead with that question?
Sure.
That's awesome.
Exactly what Christy and Rick are talking about is kind of what I wanted to emphasize very frequently when a family member calls me and they are, whether it's a mom or a dad or a wife, those are the three main phone calls that I get are moms and wives first, and then dads, and probably in that order. Very frequently what I have to do on that phone call as a mental health professional is quickly triage the situation. And what that means is I decide what's the most critical situation. And very frequently it is not the addict. It is the family member.
Hold on. You've got an addict. They are in active addiction. Their life looks in crisis. What I just heard you say, that is a big issue. But you're saying a lot of times the bigger crisis is the family members?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I'll get a mom or a wife calling me in intense pain and sick. Just almost as sick, sometimes more sick than their addict, because they're up at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to figure out what to do, because they are spinning their wheels, because their addict is destroying the house, destroying the finances, destroying their relationship, losing their jobs. They're on the street, but it makes the family member sick. And so I don't have that addict on the phone with me. I don't have that addict in the room. Who I have is a sick and a suffering family member. And I have got to, being solution oriented, I want to figure out, how do I help this person? And so very frequently it's not, let's fix your addict, it's let's fix you in spite of your addict. And so I'll provide them with resources, the family group that Christy and Rick do on a weekly basis.
And can I just say, you're doing an amazing job at that. For the last 8 years, we've tried to get our family members to come into our education classes, because it really is a family illness and we can all heal together, and it really does increase the likelihood of our loved ones maintaining sobriety by, we say, like at least 80%. It's huge. And Lane, is just this miracle worker, and that he, for every single client that we get, he's getting typically an average of 3 or 4 family members, for us to reach out and invite them to come and learn how to support appropriately.
And we have
their
Zoom
loved
meetings.
one.
Maybe you can talk about
Yeah. So we have online family education classes that are open to the public. And again, you can find that at renaissanceranch.com, or just call Lane and reach out to Lane.
Yep.
But anyway, keep sharing. So what do they do if they have a loved one? He's resistant to, which is normal, resistant to wanting to come in. How do you kind of encourage them to help them to get help?
Yep. And there are some answers to that question, but I want to emphasize that the first thing you do is get healthy yourself. Because if you are attending family groups, if you are working your own recovery, what you will learn is how to set boundaries. And that's how you're going to help that family member. One, you're going to let them know what you're willing and not willing to put up with. So you're going to set boundaries. You may kick them out. You may tell them that you won't support them in any way. There's various things that if you call Renaissance Ranch, I can help you navigate. But really, it is about getting yourself healthy. If you are unwilling to participate in the toxicity and the disease that is addiction, and you're insistent on being healthy and getting healthy, then either your family member will get healthy with you, or they will continue on their downward path until they find...
Lane, I want you to address this as well. And, Dave, as well, you told me before, you were living at 37 in the same bedroom with your parents.
That's right.
That you grew up in. And, it's interesting because I heard it this way: until the pain of the consequence becomes greater than the pain of recovery, an addict won't go into recovery because they don't think there's a problem, because there's no real pain. They can't really see it.
And the addiction is so powerful.
Yeah, a lot of times we as family members, we think we're helping our addict. We're thinking we're helping when we're actually enabling them in their addiction. And there's 2 things that make addiction worse. Number 1 is using, but number 2 is enabling. And just as an example, some time ago I was on the phone with a family member. Their son was living with them in their home. He's in his 30s, can't really keep a job, is out all night basically and sleeps all day, pays no rent. So there's no real consequences, no financial needs. Parents are, perhaps paying him, a couple $1,000 a month so he can just live and survive. And they're just doing that, they think, out of love. But what's actually happening is they're enabling the disease of addiction. And they themselves, as family members, are hurting. They're sick emotionally, physically to some degree. And it's just really, really
just so
hurt.
painful not knowing how to help. Like, how do I do this?
And we think,
Lane, work your magic.
Yeah, and we
Explain
think-
to us how to do that.
yeah, and we think we're helping, don't we? We think we're helping,
Yeah.
but we're really enabling and pushing on. Maybe, put some meat on that bone.
Okay. There's, I say this in to every family member I speak with. You have to recognize that love is setting boundaries. It means having the difficult conversations where you tell them, I love you too much to help you stay sick. And that means if you're going to be using, you can't do it here. This home and this body are a temple. And I have to keep them healthy. And to do that, I can't have anything to do with your pathway downward. We are here. We love you. We would be happy to help you get healthy. But we will not in any way help you stay sick. There's a quote that I've used in other podcasts that I tell family members frequently, and that Dave Callister told me, and that is, the addict doesn't die on the street. He dies in his parents' basement.
That's what I was told.
Yep.
My two sons were struggling with heroin, and we did a gentle intervention, and the gentleman shared to me on the phone, if I come over and
To do an intervention.
and he was attending our 12-step meetings at our church as well. We became friends with him. He said, you've got to follow my lead. And I cried and cried for days because I knew he was going to make me set boundaries. I was afraid.
Send him to the
But he
homeless
said
shelter.
to me, he said, how many 30-year-old men do you know that are still living in their parents' basement with heroin? He said that it's a very deadly disease. And I'm so grateful that he really helped us. So we did this general intervention, and we gave the bishop's phone number, the homeless shelter and the transient bishop's phone number, so they had something to fall back on. And we were taught to share, I can support you in your recovery, but I cannot support you in your addiction. And if you are willing to start going to recovery meetings, and do actions of recovery, we will support that. Yep. But it was very difficult, but it was necessary. I mean, I don't think that the boys, and they have told us, if we would have kept enabling them, they would have not survived their addiction.
Yeah. And we set boundaries, and what a boundary is not against them or to them, as if you're loving addicts. A boundary is for you to feel safe. That's what it is. It's for you to feel safe in your own space, in your own home. And a boundary is not a boundary unless there's a consequence. And so before we set a boundary, that consequence has got to be thought through, and it's got to be, solid when it's not met.
It's the most loving thing we can do because it maintains the relationship. And we start setting boundaries really small steps. We don't usually do something huge. And really, to ask somebody to leave the home is the last possible thing. I mean, we would recommend going yourself to 12-step meetings, getting involved in educational recovery classes, do everything you possibly can.
And come to our classes because they're free.
Yes,
They're free.
and
You
then
don't have to have
You'll come to where you'll realize and you'll naturally know those limits that you can set. But it is the most loving thing you can do because it helps maintain that relationship. Otherwise, the relationships kind of blow up. But Lane, please continue. I feel like
Sure.
I apologize. I feel like
No,
we keep
that's fine.
inserting our
I want to put a fine
perspective
point.
there.
I like Rick defining, and I like you guys
Yes.
defining a boundary because I do want to kind of let you know a boundary. When you're setting a boundary, you're telling the addict not what they're going to do, but what you're going to do. So my home is not going to be a place where there are substances. So if you're using substances, you won't be in my home because I don't let anybody in my home that's using substances. I also won't be around people who are high. I have that boundary in my life, and there's nothing wrong with you as a parent or a wife who has an addict setting the boundary with them that I won't be around people who are under the influence. I won't have it in my home, and I won't be around it. And I love you too much to help you. So I won't take you places where you're using it. I won't let you stay at my house while you're using it. I won't be around you while you're using it because I love you too much to help you die. I just can't do it, you know. So we can set those boundaries immediately. We can set those boundaries right now. Here are the things that I will and won't do. And then what Christy was talking about, a little different than boundaries, but expectations. If I'm going to be in your life, here are some things that I expect, and I'll start small. I expect you to attend meetings. Maybe you expect from your child a UA twice a week, or you expect
UA. Tell them what that is.
A urinalysis. So you expect them to pee in a cup and show you that they're clean.
Yeah.
You know, you can set these things, but you can set boundaries and you can have expectations for loved ones. They can resent you. They likely will resent you. I would rather have my loved one resent me and live than appreciate how I help them and die.
Wow, that's powerful. Can you share what your mother did with you? You had a very wise mother.
Yep. So I remember I have a very wise mother, and a mother who gets what she wants from God. And, you know, I was out there using, and I had money because I had owned a business. And so I could get the dope I wanted. I could stay high. I could, you know, stay in hotels. And, you know, I was going to use until I was dead. And I had the means to use until I was dead. And then my mom went and prayed for stumbling blocks in my life. And I started getting busted by the police. And I started not being able to get high. And I started, you know, running into just barrier after barrier after barrier, to the point that getting high was so much work it wasn't fun anymore. And it ended up being those stumbling blocks and those barriers that were that gave me pause long enough to have an awakening where I asked myself, what am I doing with my life? Who am I, and what do I stand for? And I remember looking at myself in the mirror one morning in November of 2015 and saying, what are you doing, bro? Lane, what is your end game? You know who you are and you know what you stand for, and you have lost that. And it was that moment that helped me call my wife and say, I want to get into treatment. I want to come home. But it had to get uncomfortable first. It had to get painful.
Yes.
And if family's on board and I can stay at home, and, you know, they'll drive me places, or they'll, you know, allow me to use around them or have a safe place, I'm not going to get to that place of pain.
So Dave, taking your perspective.
Well, Lynn, thank you. That was beautiful.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Beautiful.
And this will dovetail, because Dave, with your story, what are some of the things that happened that help you? Because again, until the pain of the consequence is greater than the pain of recovery, people won't go into recovery. With your family, this is before you were married. With your family, what were they doing to help that helped your road into recovery that you can look back on that might help our audience?
Help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, my family was always supportive and let me know they loved me, and I would say it's more what my family didn't do. And I'll tell you, I will own something, that I was very manipulative to my family, and I minimized my part in everything because I didn't take responsibility for my actions. I didn't take...
When you say minimize, what does that mean? And you said manipulate.
Yeah.
To lower the issue at hand. Maybe share a little bit more on that, because
yeah, sure. So, like, for example, when I got my first DUI, you know, it was I was on prescription pain meds and somas and muscle relaxers and Xanax, and you know, the what I told to my parents, which was a half truth, was that I was using these substances because I was hurting inside, because I and this is true with almost every addict that I meet and get to know. I had I was a victim of sexual abuse in my life on more than one occasion, and when I found certain pills, they took that pain away, You know, they made it so I could sleep all night. They made it so that I wasn't feeling those feelings of, your brain just goes through so many weird feelings through trauma. And I didn't understand a lot of these things. And thankfully, through treatment and through therapy, and I needed professionals to help me with this. But here's how my manipulation worked: is I would use that as my reason and my justification for why I needed the pills, why I just overshot the mark. I took too many. I remember this one time when I was supposed to be tending my little brother and sister while my parents were out, and I had just gotten some somas from a recent trip to Mexico with a friend, and I was just popping them left and right. And I was sitting there. I was supposed to be tending my little brother and sister that are about 7 and 6, and I'm eating a bowl of ice cream, and I was so out of it and so loopy that I literally passed out into my bowl of ice cream. And next thing, I woke up and there was paramedics, and because my little brother was so scared when he saw me do that, he didn't know what to do, and he called the paramedics. And I still did not come clean about having a problem. I said that I made up something about how I took a pill thinking it was a vitamin or something, and I accidentally took the wrong one, or, and I think, here's the thing, I think my parents and my family knew there was a problem with me, but because they didn't know how to help, they were paralyzed, and they chose instead to almost pretend like it was nothing going on, and never attack it and address it and confront it. And even through some legal things and different, it was kind of like they let me just deal with it on their own. They didn't offer to give me financial. They didn't have the finances to help me, but it was kind of just like I lived in another state, and it was kind of just like I tried to keep things, as low key as I could, and just really just try to explain it away all the time.
And if I could interject right there too.
Yeah.
Thank you for being so vulnerable.
Sure.
Because you hear these stories, and this is one thing that when I started going to meetings, it just really tugged at my heart, is how vulnerable and honest recovery is, and individuals are so willing to share. And thank you. And that reminded me of the many years that I knew something was going on, and just kind of not realizing I was in so much denial and thinking, well, someday the boys are just being boys and they'll just snap out of it. And I'm so grateful that one day into my mind came this thought: why don't you start going to these 12-step meetings? Well, actually the thought was, call this missionary in our ward or in our church and ask him about their addiction recovery program, right? We're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I thought, no, I can't do that, because then they're going to all know what a bad mom I am and how dysfunctional our family is, and I felt so much shame. But then that was like this side of my head. The other side was, no, this could be about life and death. You need to figure this out. And I will tell you, by going to those meetings, we learned so much. And then we came home and started telling our sons, our boys that were struggling with the addiction, all of the hope stories we were hearing. We're like, wow, we met this wonderful man. We need to have him on the podcast. Mike Patience, addicted to meth for 13 years, and he found recovery, and I don't think they recognized that you could actually recover from addiction. If you're out there right now using, there is so much hope. We have heard hundreds and hundreds of people over the last 15 years share their story, and people recover every day from addiction. And when you go to your first 12-step meeting, I'm not kidding, you're going to feel stuff you've never felt before. I didn't even know how powerful the Spirit could be till I went to my first meeting. It just blew me away. And then you'll know that you're not alone. You'll know that there's hope, and you'll learn from other people. And as a family member, we learned what to do and what not to do, right? Yeah. It was powerful. So today we celebrate recovery. We feel like the 12 steps and working those partnered with Jesus Christ, with Heavenly Father, whoever you define your higher power as, that is like the bullseye approach to healing. It's all the pieces of the puzzle coming together. And I love how both of you talked about complacency, about how you thought you got this, and you came to respect addiction and came to recognize that this is something that I need to make sure I'm doing every single day of my life. Lane, Dave talked about the dailies. Do you have a daily practice that you do now to maintain your sobriety?
Yes, I use the WellBeing Model, which looks at our emotional, intellectual, spiritual, and social well-being. And so what I do every day, and mine is generally towards the end of the day, I look back on my day and say, Lane, what did you do today to take care of your social well-being? And if I fell short, then I set a goal for tomorrow. And I do the same with the emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. So every day I'm taking a measure of how my day went, where I fell short, and how I can do better tomorrow.
I love that. So it's kind of like you did the morning inventory, you do the morning work, and you do the evening work. Beautiful example.
Yeah.
Rick, would you have any final thoughts?
Well, I do, and you know, I keep thinking about what Dave you just said. You know, you had some abuse, some sexual abuse when you were younger. A lot of times that will trigger addiction later on, and we know that an addict will use a drug of choice to numb out feelings. This is a feelings disease, and they will want to numb out through their drug of choice. Shame being the core center of all addiction, it can come many ways, but in treatment, that's what is dealt with, so the shame can be rid from our souls, so we don't have to use anymore. We couple therapy at the ranch with the 12 steps. And people say, well, what exactly are the 12 steps? The 12 steps to me are a practical application of the atonement of Jesus Christ, doing for me what I cannot do for myself, helping me rid these things out, working alongside of a therapist to help me to develop my contact with my higher power, to help me rid these things that are afflicting me, that are a ball and chain emotionally and spiritually that I've been dragging around, that I try to numb out. So it's a powerful process. And those of you that are family members and are struggling and saying, man, I just don't know what to do now. I'm hurting. I'm sick. I'm just physically hurting. Call Lane. He will be able to counsel with you, give you some ideas. It may not be that your addict is ready right now to go in. But one thing for sure that will help is you working your cut recovery is the number one thing that will help your loving addict. Not you working your recovery from drugs or alcohol. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking recovery from the emotional pain, the resentment, the fear, recovery from not learning how to set boundaries, all of that stuff. And counseling with Lane will really, really help you, and it's free. Also, what will help is going to 12-step meetings. You can find them online, and coming to our meetings. We hold, as a ranch, 4.
That'll be 5.
Coming 5 meetings, and you can Zoom in. There's Zoom meetings Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. One of them is strictly a woman's meeting that is only for women, which is just a sacred experience and very needed and helpful. And Christy and another individual run. So,
and some are taught from a parent perspective and some a spouse perspective, because if you have a spouse, it's really nice to kind of hear, what worked for this other couple. And every one of our educators have a personal recovery experience with their own addiction or with a family member addiction. And we're growing this program. We use a Healing Through Christ manual. You want to show that really quick? We love this book. This is the best workbook I have found on the internet for family members who have a loved one in addiction. And it's the blue right here. It's help, hope, and healing for family members who have loved one in addiction. We love this manual because it has the 12 steps in it with the questions where you journal. That's how you really start to apply the steps to your life. And then the second half is the appendix. Well, you'll learn about the disease of addiction. You'll learn, how do I set boundaries? How do I detach from the negative part and maintain this beautiful sacred relationship with my loved ones? You guys, recovery is real. It's for the whole family. It is so critical that you as family members start learning this information, that you learn how to set boundaries and learn how to be happy regardless of the choices being made around you. Our next episode, we're going to talk about codependency. Those are some enabling behaviors that family members just naturally pick up just from the fear and the frustration of not knowing what to do, and the despair, actually. There's enabling or rescuing behaviors, persecuting and suffering behaviors. So we'll talk about that. We're going to actually be moving on to step 2, which is come to believe that the power of God can restore me to spiritual and emotional health. So join with us again. In a couple of weeks, we'll get that podcast out. It'll be wonderful. Thank you so much. And God bless you, and we'll be praying for you.
Thank you.
And thanks to our guests, Lane and Dave. We love you, and we learn vicariously from each other, and so appreciate your willingness.
Thanks for taking your time.
Share.
It's wonderful.
Thank you.
To have you here and to see you so vulnerable and helpful to many. So thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.